Hello guys, how's it going? My name is Dalaran. In this video, I'll be talking a bit about Outlaw Rogue and how to top damage in Mythic Plus Dungeons using Outlaw Rogue every single time. A lot of people don't really give Outlaw really that much credit. Most people just focus on Assassination and Subtlety, the two of the more popular specs. But I feel like that's mostly because Outlaw with its RNG back in Legion gave a lot of people a bad taste in their mouth. I feel like Outlaw is in a much better place, and even though RNG is an element, there's so many ways to bypass it. The spec does so much damage, it is definitely not worth overlooking it. So let's talk about how I've been able to top damage every single Mythic Plus 10, 11, and even Mythic Plus carries using Outlaw Rogue. Let's first ask a question, why Outlaw? Why would you want to bring Outlaw? Subtlety and Assassination are both great specs, and they're great at what they do, whether it's AoE for Mythic Plus Dungeons or single target in raids. But Subtlety and Assassination are a little bit different when it comes to their focus compared to Outlaw. Subtlety focuses on focused damage, as in they'll use the AoE abilities, but most of that AoE splash damage is going to empower their single target damage. So when it comes to cleaving enemies and trying to make sure everybody's taking spread amounts of damage, Subtlety isn't really great for that. So in dungeons like Bolstering, for example, where you want your enemies to die very evenly, Subtlety kind of just falls behind. With Assassination, they're really good at spread damage. That's one of their advantages, is to be able to triple garrote, triple rupture multiple enemies. Usually 3 and 2 is the safe spot, and even if those enemies are far apart, that damage over time really does tick. Outside of single target fights and cleave fights, I feel like Assassination is decent at doing AoE damage, making sure to spread it to multiple enemies. While there is a little bit of a ramp up to it, it still does a serviceable job. But in my opinion, I think Outlaw Rogue is the spec that has the most potential for pure AoE cleave damage, whether it's 1 person, 2 targets, 3 targets, 4 targets, 5, 10, 20, because of the way that they are built. I would have to say they have the strongest AoE damage, and on top of it, one of the easiest playstyle and other mechanics that make him viable and wanted in Mythic Plus Dungeons. Another advantage to Outlaw that it has over the specs of Subtlety and Assass have to build particularly for AoE damage. When they build for AoE, they kind of lose out in single target department. When they build for single target, they lose out in AoE department, so it's really a give and take system and honestly a choice. For Outlaw Rogues, it's not really a choice. You only have to go for single target damage, and because of Blade Flurry mechanic for Outlaw, you also get AoE no matter what build you go. It's kind of like a best in both worlds. So you have Azrael traits that work for single target and AoE. You have talents that work for single target and AoE, which I think makes the spec very flexible in the long run. Another thing to note is mostly melees are not really wanted in Mythic Plus Dungeons. There's a couple reasons for it. When you're pulling a group of enemies, the trash pack can have a lot of AoE damage to it, they can have cleave damage, and if you're not positioned properly, the tank might end up one-shotting you, and sometimes there's mobility issues, getting out of things, moving out of mechanics. When you have too many melees, it's like too many hands in a jar. It just doesn't quite work, and it feels very uncomfortable, and the group might feel constrained. So most of the groups might want to bring ranged classes. Outlaw Rogue completely bypasses that with the talent of Acrobatic Strikes, which gives you melee abilities 8-yard range, allowing you to dance around dangerous packs while still being able to dish out decent damage. The main way that Outlaw Rogue does their cleave is through use of ability called Blade Flurry. Blade Flurry turns your single target damage into cleave for 45% of single target damage, so you'll be hitting the boss for 100% and everybody around them for 45%. This is very synergetic with a lot of your talents, abilities, and Azrael traits. For example, if you load up yourself Ace Up Your Sleeve or Deadshot, which are very powerful and bursty traits, if you get a big crit during one of those trait procs and you have Blade Flurry on, the cleave damage of that crit is going to splash onto other enemies, which allows Outlaw to kind of build a bursty AoE playstyle depending on what Azrael traits you go for. So it's impossible for me to think that nobody wants to play Outlaw, even though they have so many synergies and so many different builds that you can run that all work because of Blade Flurry and the trait interactions. On top of that, Outlaw Rogues bring in a gouge, and a lot of the incapacitation interrupts are not really common in the game anymore, as Outlaw is the only one with a pretty short one at 15-second cooldown. It's a great ability to interrupt enemies that have a cast that is immune to interrupts. So think weapon testers in Motherload, for example. So instead of a weapon tester being able to knock your party around or silence a healer, now you can step in between and gouge them. Grappling Hook is also another exceptional utility for Outlaw, allowing you insanely good mobility. I like it better than Shadow Step because Shadow Step uses enemies and allies' position in order to move around, which can be limiting. With Outlaw, it gives you 40-yard range to be able to just zoom to a location on demand with a fairly short cooldown, with also cooldown reduction mechanic feeding into the ability, so while it says it's a minute cooldown, it realistically becomes about 30 seconds with a duration. When it comes to damage for single target, Outlaw isn't that far off from other specs, but you will definitely notice a difference when you have Assassination, Subtlety, and Outlaw all DPS in a boss. Subtlety and Assass start with high burst, so their damage will climb into the 20Ks, but depending on the fight, the longer the fight, their damage tends to scale down and down and down. On average groups, most of those specs will end up at about 13 to 14k DPS. Outlaw Rogue is a bit different. It can start at about 14-15k, and it doesn't have that slide down, so it'll continue on chugging along at that 15k. So while most of these specs will have high burst but low sustain at the end, Outlaw doesn't really have burst, but it doesn't ever really have low sustain. Also, you have the mechanic of Roll the Bones, which can give you like 20k, 21k DPS for the duration as long as the bones are available. So it's a very interesting mechanic, and definitely you should be pulling extra mobs and continuing into the boss fight if you ever roll a 5 buff in your group. The biggest advantage to Outlaw Rogue and what allows you to do the most amount of damage in Mythic Plus Dungeons is your AoE damage. Because of Blade Flurry functioning with abilities like Adrenaline Rush and your talents and your Azure traits, it allows you to have great burst as well as sustain AoE damage, and that's where the spec shines in. The thought process is, if you can eliminate a lot of the mobs that are standing between you and the boss as fast as possible, then it means that the more time for your group to do the boss. And this works out in dungeons that are both tyrannical and fortified, where in fortified you're able to dish out through the mobs that are stronger a little bit more efficiently, and if it's tyrannical, it just simply allows you to run with a group that's mostly single target while you take on the responsibility of pure unadulterated AoE. Now in this part of the video, I will talk a bit about some of the tips in order to increase your Outlaw Rogue damage, but if you're not familiar with Outlaw Rogue, I do have a PvE guide for Outlaw Rogues, and I'll link that down below. I made one as soon as BFA came out, talking about traits, talking about rotation, talking about abilities and talents that you may run. Of course, it's a good idea to sim your character to find out the best talents and the best build that is going to net you the most amount of damage. Anyway, after watching this video, feel free to come back and check out these tips for good AoE. So some of the tips for great AoE damage for Outlaw are really simple. It all comes down to the proper use of Blade Flurry. If you use Blade Flurry improperly, then you're not going to net any kind of damage. If you maximize the use of Blade Flurry, you're always going to be at the top of the charts no matter what. Try to save your Blade Flurry charges, which you have 2 off passively, for big trash packs. So let's say you're dealing with a trash pack that's 3 mobs and they're basically all dying. There's no point to turn on Blade Flurry when there's an 8 pack right afterwards. It's better to save 2 charges of Blade Flurry for that bigger pack mobs and just kind of whittle down the 3 mobs that you have right in front of you. Try to combine Adrenaline Rush into your Blade Flurry for big packs for AoE. Adrenaline Rush provides you insane amounts of damage increase from the auto attacks which count to Blade Flurry, but also the energy, common point building, and the finishes that you'll be able to use during Adrenaline Rush. If you're running Killing Spree as a talent of choice, make sure to use that with Blade Rush on small packs that have no health or on 8 or plus adds, trying to maximize the amount of damage you'll be able to get with your Killing Spree since the cooldown is pretty long. If you're running Blade Rush, however, then try to use it on cooldown with or without Blade Flurry. It'll allow you more uses, it'll also allow you to get back the energy so you can build common points and use finishers. So it plays into the playstyle well, but it's going to be only as good as the amount of times that you end up using it throughout the run. Lastly, if you run bursty talents like Ace Up Your Sleeve or Deadshot traits, all of them combo with Blade Flurry really well. So if you're able to synergize Ace Up Your Sleeve big crit, make sure to have Blade Flurry running ahead of time. Same goes for Deadshot. If you're trying to get a beefed up pistol shot, try to have Blade Flurry available right before you use your Deadshot trait. A basic opener for Outlaw Rogues when it comes to dealing with adds is I like to open up with an ambush. I like to turn on Blade Flurry as soon as I can. I like to Blade Rush if you're talented into it. If not, continue to build with Send Strikes until 5 or 6 common points, depending if you're Deeper Strat, Vigor, or Mark for Death. And then you want to use Roll the Bones for your buffs. From there on, you want to proceed to your general rotation and try to use Blade Flurry if you're going to need extra damage or not. If you guys are interested in checking out more Outlaw Rogue stuff from Mythic Pluses, let me know in the comments below. As always, in the description there's going to be a lot of useful tidbits and information that you guys may be able to even use, and I'll even link you guys some of the different websites you guys may use, like Blood Mallet, to find out what are the best traits, what are the best trinkets, as well as a link to raid bot so you guys can do some simming for your own character. Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching. I do hope you enjoyed. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and as always guys, subscribe to the channel, like the video, comment below, and I'll see all of you in the next one.